Hi, welcome to Love Saranghae with Peter and Andrea. In the next 30 minutes, we'll take you on a journey into the exciting world of entrepreneurship, relationships, and the secrets behind achieving that coveted glow. Are you ready? Let's go.
Welcome back to another episode of Love Saranghae with us, Peter and Andrea. Today, we're honored to share the extraordinary journey of Katherine Choi, founder of Saranghae, a sustainable and stylish lifestyle brand now carried by Anthropologie, Indigo, Whole Foods, and boutiques around the world. Her products have graced the pages of Oprah magazine, Teen Vogue, Esquire, and Today. But the real story of Saranghae begins long before any of that. Raised in an environment that left her feeling unworthy and invisible, Katherine's early adulthood was marked by struggle and heroin addiction. In 1997, she entered Detox and began a lifelong journey of personal healing, transformation, and purpose. What emerged over time is not just a successful business, but a powerful voice for empowerment. A brand that invites us to pack your power and reminds us that small, consistent steps can lead to extraordinary change. Katherine speaks openly about her recovery, self-worth, and what it truly means to live with intention. This is more than a conversation about business. It's about healing, identity, and reclaiming your life at any age. So let's begin. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you. One little correction I would make is our products were carried at Anthropologie, Whole Foods, and all those.
Okay.
We'll talk about how things have shifted a lot in the business.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So Katherine, your journey is incredibly powerful. We've only recently met, so thank you for being here today. I'm so excited for our community to learn about you because you have such a powerful story and a story of sort of rebirth and transformation many times over. So can you take us back to the early years? What was your childhood like growing up in Montreal, and how did those early experiences shape the sense of self?
Yeah. So, my parents were immigrants from Korea. My dad, having the war, he escaped North Korea at the age of 17. And it's quite a miracle that he ended up in Montreal. And there was a whole series of events that happened that landed him there. And it wasn't without its trauma for him.
Of course.
Basically, I would say that in hindsight, I think that my father truly lived his entire life without me realizing how much of a broken heart he had. And, unfortunately, that expressed itself through alcohol, through anger, and particularly towards me. My sister and I, we were just two. My sister was just a year and a half older than me. And, it's a very patriarchal culture. My sister, being firstborn, was, loved, accepted, wanted. But the second one was supposed to be a boy.
Oh, wow. Yes. Yes. I know that culture well.
Yes. And so I wasn't a boy. And I think that for whatever reason, I became the kind of the butt of his frustrations and his disappointments and all of that. So growing up, my sister and I were treated very differently. And I endured quite a bit of abuse, emotionally, physically, and had very, very low self-esteem. I really had this sense that there was something wrong with me. And that was kind of the perfect storm for what happened as I entered early adulthood. When I was in university, my father being, he was like all powerful in our house. My mother was very much, we were all kind of scared of him. And so whatever he said was what happened. And so when it came to university, you know, my father did not want my sister and I to leave the house. He wanted us to stay, you know, in Montreal, stay in the house, and go to we went to McGill, which is a good school. But we didn't have that university experience of going and staying in residence and all of that.
I didn't either. I understand this very clearly.
Really?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, two of my boys are now, you know, in university, and I see how important it is, that experience.
The independence that you feel.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But no, it wasn't even, you know, that I had a normal social experience, even not like being at home, because my dad was so controlling that he did not allow us to, you know, we weren't technically allowed to date, even in university. We weren't allowed, except on the odd occasion, we were allowed to go out to a dance or some kind of social thing, but we had to be home early. And I didn't have the same freedom that my friends did. And it was a very, very oppressive type of environment. You know, I had no freedom. But in university is when I met my first boyfriend, he was Italian, and he was, I guess, normal rebellious, right? Like, he did whatever he wanted to do. And, you know, he lived at home as well, but his parents didn't, like, you know, even if they told him he was allowed to, he would still do it. Well, yeah, you know, for me, that was the novelty, right? To be with someone like that. And even though my parents pretended not to know that I had a boyfriend, they couldn't really do anything about the fact that it's not like I wasn't allowed to go to school. And if I was at school, then, you know, what are they going to do, right? And so I meet this boy in university, and, you know, we are together for the entirety of university. So I think I met him in my first year. And it wasn't like I was like deeply in love with him. It was, I met somebody who seemed to like me, and I wasn't really sure why they liked me, but that was enough for me. And I felt very safe being around him. And so when I graduated from university, I started working for a bank. My first job was as a bank teller. And he started saying, like, we should move in together. And I was like, there's no way. No, you're gonna let me move out with you. But basically what had happened was my sister had graduated a year before me, and she left Montreal and she went to Toronto, and she was studying to be a Montessori teacher. And so, like,
how did your dad feel about her leaving?
Well, I mean, you know, it was for her career, right?
Okay.
So,
that was okay.
Exactly. So he let her go, but found it very difficult not to only have me at home. And so he didn't want to lose me either. We made this plan, and I said, I'm going to move in, not with him, I'm going to move in with my girlfriend. I'd like to move out with my girlfriend. And at first it was like this hard no. But then I told my mother, if he doesn't let me move out, then I'm just going to move to Toronto and live with my sister. And then he kind of went, okay, maybe I have to give a little bit, right? Because I'm an adult, right? I'm like 20, 21 or something like that at that point. And he allowed me to move out with my girlfriend. But it was actually me and my girlfriend and her boyfriend, who we all went to school together, and my boyfriend. So there were 4 of us living in this house. When I moved out, it was the first time in my entire life that I could finally have my own freedom and do whatever I wanted to do. And I remember making this decision that I was going to do everything that I felt that I missed out on. Everything. However misguided that was, it was also just me kind of wanting to experience what I felt other people got to experience. And unfortunately, the way circumstances happened, my boyfriend had gone to high school with one of his friends. And he was working in a factory during the day, very, like, he himself also, later on, I came to understand, he himself came from a very disempowered home environment, and he had developed an addiction himself to heroin. He was a junkie. And he lived at home in his parents' basement. You know, he had to hide and use his drugs in the car or in the basement. And so when we had our own place, he was like so excited that he had somewhere to come. And so he wanted to share the fun. And this is my boyfriend's
Boyfriend's friend.
friend from high school.
Boyfriend's
Yeah.
friend.
Yes. So what happened was, it seemed quite benign to me, right? He would come over on Friday evenings, and my roommates were like pot smokers, so they would just, smoke pot. And, he would share with us his drugs. And even at that point, my first experience with drugs, without really knowing it, because it was called smack, and I wasn't sure. I was like kind of sure, but I wasn't sure that my first drug
I don't
was
remember we used to call it smack.
Right.
Yeah, it's called smack. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And it was smoked through a tube, and it wasn't like a needle in the arm.
Yep.
It felt like this is not that big of a deal. And it was like, didn't seem as, like crazy as you would think. And kind of developed into this pattern that Friday nights turned into this. And I remember thinking one day when I was like coming home after work on a Friday, feeling like, wow, I'm so excited for the weekend. I get to have fun. And it was like this sense of, I finally get it. I finally get why people are excited about the weekends, right? Anyways, one Friday evening, this is like maybe a few months in, we are sitting around the table, and my roommates are there and they're smoking pot. And I remember sitting there and I was looking at one of my roommates, the girl, who I was closer friends with her boyfriend. And I remember thinking and being in full judgment of her, right? Just thinking, oh, I can't stand her. She's so messy. She's so mean to her boyfriend. She's so this. I wish she wasn't here. Like all these thoughts are going through my head. And meanwhile, like, my boyfriend and his friend are kind of like, starting to get high. And then they pass it to me. And I take one toke. And what happens is I have this experience of suddenly everything kind of going silent. And it was like this sense of pure love that I'd never experienced in my entire life. Like everything was just love. And it was like time stopped for a second. Mm-hmm. And I remember just feeling for the first time in my entire life what it was like to just be completely whole. And when I looked at my roommate, the one that I had been just a minute ago thinking all these things about, all I could feel was just like pure love for her, And at that moment, looking back years later, that was the moment where I really shifted from this is fun to I need this in my life. And so shortly after that, it didn't happen right away, but my relationship with this substance came to the forefront of my life. And within a few months, we graduated from this was a Friday night thing to a Friday and Saturday night thing to a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then I started going to work high. And then, before I knew it, I was like physically addicted to this drug. And, what's crazy is that I never experienced that feeling again of like that experience. What I consider actually now to be a God experience, right? It's the experience of feeling who we are at our core. And I can skip ahead to today to really connect those two worlds where, from a very unhealed place, we can get to the place that I describe, but not, obviously through substance. It's almost like a seeking that was instilled in me in that very, very early experience that has led me down the path to where I am today. Yeah. So what followed after that were 3.5 very harrowing years.
Oh.
Yeah. Of, descending down this path of addiction that, you don't see it like how you're changing as it's happening. All these little decisions day by day. But basically what ended up happening over the course of the next 3.5 years was that, I went from being someone who was very responsible, very hardworking, just like a good girl.
Yeah, quote unquote.
Yeah. To someone who basically, my boyfriend, who got clean a year before I did, was running an escort agency out of our apartment. And
Oh my goodness. Wow.
cheating on me with one of the escorts, and I had been fired from my job, and I was, just this disaster on wheels. It was such a relief when I got fired. And I was funding my habit by skimming off the top of my father's investments because I had a securities license and he'd entrusted me with his life savings. And I was
Oh my goodness.
skimming off the top of it to support my habit. And every day, I really wanted every single day for me, about, I would say, even less than 6 months after I started, I knew I was in trouble. And the first time that I experienced withdrawal from this substance, I realized that I was so screwed. I was like, oh my, what am I going to do now?
What were your experiences like with the withdrawal? What did you feel?
It's terrible, especially when you know that something's going to take it away right away.
Yeah, that's right. There's an escape clause, right?
Exactly. And so, even though I had this sense that I wanted to stop from very early on, it was every single day for over 3 years. I would wake up in the morning and go, today's the day. Today is the day
I stopped.
I'm not going to use. And within, a short period of time, I would succumb. Sometimes a bit longer.
Did you bypass the smoking stage and go into the direct stage?
Oh, man.
Was there a difference?
A huge difference.
Massive difference. And was there also a difference in the withdrawal symptoms from the...
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Because, I went from, smoking to within a year, I was an IV drug user,
Oh my God.
There was, and it wasn't in the end, it wasn't just heroin. Like, I can go on about the cast of characters. Sometimes I can't believe, the different phases we went through and the kind of the underbelly of what happens.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that my life had become this.
Yeah.
That's hard to believe to see you on the other side.
Right.
And if I didn't know you then,
Wow.
but seeing you here and seeing how beautiful you are and how poised you are and articulate and what this beautiful life you built.
Right.
It's very interesting.
So that's an interesting comment because if we then take that lens to everybody else and how we judge people based on how they look or what their story is today is not necessarily who they were and who they may be.
Right.
And yet we make those pastors' judgments on a flash just because they don't fit the mold of. So that's a lesson for all of us, right?
Yeah.
So Katherine, in the middle of all of this, what was the evolution of your relationship with your family?
Yeah. So my family could sense, like my parents over time could sense that there was something that was off with me. My father continued to, I guess, see me in the way that he'd always seen me, right? Which was, he was very hard on me. And because I didn't live at home anymore, though, there was just this sense of he had limited control over me.
Yeah.
But I could feel like he knew something was up, but he couldn't put his finger on it. And he would get angry at me for things that weren't actually things that he was really angry about. He was angry that he just couldn't put his finger on it. And my mother, she knew that something was really wrong. My mother was very religious, and I remember she would put things in my bag, like she would put like little prayer cards in my bag and stuff.
My mom would do that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they felt very helpless and they just very difficult.
So what's interesting is that Korean men, especially old men, they have a pattern which they manifest fear and their own inadequacy and the fear that they cannot control, the things they cannot control.
Yeah.
And that becomes anger because to them, anger is powerful, and fear and hurt and shame is not powerful. Right. And so And so your mom turned her fear and all of those emotions into prayer cards to try to help you.
Right.
Your dad just got angry.
Right.
Which is exactly what my dad did.
Right.
Right. They don't. So these old Chinese or old Korean men they didn't have manuals.
No.
To say this is what your emotion is. Let it out. It's something that I have to always take a look at as well, because anger is the default emotion.
Yeah.
That's so true. It's also, Brent, if you look at immigrants in general, like people from other parts of the world, I'm Middle Eastern, so where I come from too, like you don't talk about the feelings.
Right.
You don't express you don't reach out for help. You just figure it out. Everything is, you have to be quiet. Everything stays in the family unit. Right. You don't talk about problems with anyone. Everyone should think everything's perfect. Yeah. And the good side of that is everyone thinks everything's great all the time. But on the flip side of that is internally, they're really suffering.
Yes.
And eventually that can manifest in different ways. Health problems, heroin addictions, different things. So it's very interesting to see how different cultures deal
similar cultures. Similar cultures, really.
Yes. It's true. And then to see how they're so similar, so far apart.
Okay, so then let's now come out the other side.
Right.
Like we've gone through this muck, right? This you've gone through the hell, the shadow of the valley of death. Yeah. And you're coming out the other side. What was the trigger? How did that happen? Because that's the story, and that's very powerful.
Yes. Yeah. My biggest fear every day. I could get through each day kind of pretending that it wasn't that bad, even though it was really bad. But it was the night times that were where I could not hide from the reality of my life. And so at nighttime, I would lie in bed and I would have the blankets over my head and I couldn't sleep. And all I would be saying is I would be praying. I'd be saying, please God, please God, please God, please never no matter what happens, please don't let him find out about the money. And I was scared. That was the thing that I was most scared of, was that my father would find out that I was stealing money from him.
Yeah.
And the idea of that was so terrifying to me because I knew that I couldn't face him. And my plan was, if he ever finds out, I'm going to kill myself. And that is, right? And so, that was this thing that I did, I don't know for how long, like months or years or whatever. And one day he finds out about the money. And my sister calls me one day and she's like, have you been doing something in daddy's bank accounts? And as soon as she asked that question, I was like, game over. And so anyways, long story short, I get off the phone and I'm like, okay, this is it. This is the moment of truth. And the phone starts ringing like crazy. It's, landlines back then, and there's call display, and I can see my father's calling me and the bank is calling me. And I was like, I need to get out of here. And, at that point, I was very much on my own because, my boyfriend was running his escort agency and cheating on me. And so I leave the apartment and I have a dog. I have my dog and I'm like walking down the streets of Montreal, just kind of like trying to think about, okay, what do I, right? And interestingly, one of the prayer cards that my mother had stuck in my purse, I had sat there one night and just memorized it. And I didn't memorize it for any reason other than to just occupy my brain and not think about other things. And so I remember that I was walking down the street and I was in such a state of anxiety that I just kept saying it over and over and over like a mantra, the same thing, because it helped me just not think about the trouble that I was in. I was, on one hand, thinking to myself, okay, what do I do? Am I going to jump in front of a subway? Like, what do I do with my dog? What am I really going to do this? And on the other hand, I was praying for a miracle, right? And the miracle was, please let none of this be real. Please let me be able to go back in time to that moment when I made the choice to try this and actually not have made that choice. And like that, let me just erase all
this over.
Yes. I don't know how many hours went by, but I ended up in front of this church that I was very familiar with. And even though I was raised Catholic and stuff, but I was never religious. And I had always believed in God, but I never really believed that God was like relevant to me or like specific wanting to help me, right? And anyways, I tied up my dog and I went inside the church, and I remember just sitting there, and it was like empty, but there were candles that were lit. And I remember just thinking like, maybe this one time, like maybe because I have never been so desperate in my life, maybe God will grant me a miracle. And I'm sitting there and, I really, looking back, think that a miracle did happen, but it's not like this big flashing or
it was not in the way that this was happening.
It was a miracle of just this slight change in thought. And the slight change in thought was all these past years, it was such a secret for me that I had this heroin addiction. I never asked anyone for help and never told my parents, never told my sister. I felt like no one could help me. I was like, this thing is so much bigger than me. I can never overcome this addiction. And if I ask for help, they're going to try and help me, and they're going to see that I can't stop. And so I might as well just like, don't even go there. And in the years that I had been in my addiction, I had met many people who were still using, but they all joked about, oh, I went to that treatment center. Oh, I went to that treatment center. And they were still there using with me. And so in my head, I was like, well, treatment doesn't work.
Doesn't work, yeah.
And so while I was sitting there, I just had this little voice go, maybe you could just try. Maybe you could just ask for help. And like, maybe even though it feels like this is, you've done the unforgivable, like maybe it isn't that bad and maybe it's forgivable. And so that's when I made the decision to call my sister. And my sister, who was in Toronto. She just had her first child, who was like a year old. And I basically went back to my apartment, picked up the phone, and I called her and I told her everything. And interestingly, she was like, I was just waiting for the call. And so what had happened without me knowing was, because I thought I was keeping this big secret, but it was very obvious to people that I was messed up. And I went to visit my sister one time, which took a lot because to go for 2 nights to Toronto, I had to figure out how am I going to get through being away for 2 nights and have enough to last me and all that stuff, right? And so I went to go visit her, and one day while I was out with my brother-in-law, she went through my bag and she found everything. And she even found, I had been trying to get help. I went to a 12-step meeting in Narcotics Anonymous, had a sponsor who I totally lied to and pretend that I was clean. And like, it was such a mess. And her phone number was written in the front page of my Narcotics Anonymous book. And my sister called her and said, I've just, found all this stuff in my sister's bag. And this woman basically said, you can't help her until she asks for help. And so when I picked up the phone and I asked for help, she was like, I was waiting for you to call. And so that was another miracle.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, we have this call and I'm crying and I'm telling her everything and she's crying. And then she finally goes, okay, so what are we going to do? And I was like, what do you mean? What are we going to do? She's like, well, I think you need to go to detox. I think you need to go to treatment. And I was like, okay, here we go. You don't get it. It doesn't work. It's not going to work for me. But it's not like I could say, it's okay. You know what? Forget it. It's okay. Thanks for listening.
I take it all back. I'm out of here.
So,
They're into it now.
Exactly. Right. And I was like, okay, fine. Okay, we'll do it. Right. And I was very sure that it wasn't going to help. But anyways, over the next couple weeks, we have to figure out all these details. And, it was out in the open now that I am actively using during this period while we're trying to figure things out for me. And I end up going to this detox center in East End, Montreal, which is a very, very down and out part of Montreal. It's equivalent to Jane and Finch in Toronto.
Okay.
And I had never spent much time there at all. Even for me, being an IV drug user, I was shocked when I came out of the car in the parking lot and was walking towards the detox center across the street. And I was like, there were like syringes lined up on the sidewalk that people were just like, it was like really like, holy shit, this is really down and out here, right? And so I walk into this detox center, which is a very, very no frills kind of place. And strangely, the minute I walk in, I feel very much at home. I feel like, wow, and I didn't know what it was, but within a very short period of time, like within, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes, I befriended someone there who was there, and he was the only other person who was in that detox for the week that I was there who spoke English. He was there for heroin, and he had been there for a week already. So he'd already gone through the worst of the withdrawal. Right. And he'd also been there like 2 months before that. And so he had gone through the withdrawal and then went out, relapsed, and then came back and did it again. So he was like a pro. And I really felt like, wow, that he was there to help me, And basically, we like became instant friends. And he kind of took me under his wing and he was like, okay, so this is what's going to happen. Tonight, the nurse is going to come. She's going to give you the cocktail of pills, because it was a medical detox. It was like they would just kind of taper you off over the course of 4 days. And so she you're going to get, a cocktail. Don't let anyone try and bargain or trade any pills with you. Just take all your pills. And, you're probably going to pass out. And the next few days are going to be the hardest. But then after that, the worst of it's going to be over, and I'll see you then. And so exactly that happens. I take the pills and I lie down. And for the next 3 or 4 days, I entered what in hindsight felt like a dream state, because I wasn't completely out. I know that there were moments that I remember little bits and pieces, and I had to get up every 12 hours to get tapering medication. But I don't remember much of it at all. And on the 4th morning, I wake up, I open my eyes, and it's like very early. It must be like 5:30 or 6 in the morning. And nobody's awake. Everything's quiet, and the light that's very bright. And I remember lying there feeling like, I feel different, and I don't know why, And I was trying to think, what's different? Why do I feel like this? And it dawned on me that for the first time in 4 years since I started, I didn't wake up with this feeling like I had a monkey on my back that was like tapping me on my shoulder saying, you gotta get high. And it was like just silent. And I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. And I was like, what do I need right now? And the only thing that I needed was, I was like, I would love to take a hot bath. And so, I went to the bathroom, I scrubbed out this dirty bathtub and I took this hot bath and I felt so good. And then the next day, same thing. And then the next day, same thing. And the next day. And basically what happened was, from that detox center, I was there for 2 weeks. I went from that detox and went to Toronto for a 3-month residential treatment. And then after that, I was in recovery and I went to 12-step meetings for almost 10 years. I was
Wow.
very, very dedicated in the world of recovery and addiction. And what I saw and what I came to appreciate was, from that first day, I never experienced ever again that craving to use. And
wow.
In that, 10 years of being immersed in recovery, I was able to see over time how remarkable that was.
Yeah.
And I came to understand that for whatever reason that I could not explain, I was given this gift. And I didn't know why I was given this gift. And I also felt somewhat unworthy of it. I was like, I don't know why this person is struggling and can't stay clean. I don't know how to help them because I didn't do this, right? I just woke up and it was gone. And why did I get this, but they don't, right?
Almost like survivor's guilt. Like you
Yeah.
feel guilty for having this luxury of, not having that urge anymore.
But then I did come to understand why I was given that gift and move the timeline forward 10 years when I started my business. I never intended to start to connect my backstory with my business. It was never in the cards. But what happened was I stabilized my life over 10 years. I met my husband. I started having a family. And even though the desire to use never came back, what did come back after the first year was like, I would say when I think back on my first year clean, I think of that as the happiest period of my life. Because even though I had nothing, I was in so much debt. I had no job. I was living initially in what you'd call a halfway house, meaning women in recovery who were trying to stay clean. I really was in a very transitionary place in my life. I have never experienced living as gratitude, but I was just naturally grateful. Like I would wake up and I would just be in this state of wonder about how I could appreciate things that I had forgotten how to appreciate. Just a cup of tea or the appreciation for being free from this addiction and just being normal. That was like so prevalent for me. And I think when you live like that, you become an attractor, right?
That's
and so
true.
It felt very much like all I needed to do was show up for myself and do the things that I was supposed to do and just put one foot in front of the other. And the right person would come along. I'd make this connection. It would lead to this. It just felt like I had no fear about life. And it was beautiful. But after the first year, it was almost like I kind of like gently landed. And I was like, you're good now. Like, you don't need to be carried anymore. And so what came back was this deep sense of inadequacy started to creep back in to my life.
Interesting.
Right? And so that was the emotional pain that I was very familiar with. But the difference was that I had gone through this year of intense like therapy and 12 steps. And like I had come to understand the source of my pain, my emotional pain, and, been able to put a story around why I feel this way about myself and know that it wasn't real. The truth of who I am is not how it feels, but it felt very real. And I didn't know how to relieve my emotional pain. And so I started to seek out whatever I could, like initially just therapy and group therapy and whatever. But then, because I've always been open to things and curious about healing, when I would hear about something else, like, for example, like Reiki or anything anything anyone mentioned to me that was like, oh, I'm going to try that, I would try it. I have my first child and I am in a place where I had gone back into banking briefly for a few years, but I came to understand that I really it was not for me. And yet I didn't know who I was or what was for me because I'd never been encouraged to like actually cultivate an interest in anything where I didn't think I was good at anything, right?
But I think it's also like that it comes back to immigrant parents.
Yes.
Like,
right.
You're supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, or like an engineer.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to think about what you love or what you want to, do. It's about, supporting yourself and having a good job that your parents can be proud of you for.
Yeah. So basically, I end up in a place where I've just had my first child. I have left banking, but I don't know what my next move is. And I'm still trying to address kind of this place of deep inadequacy that I felt. It was just always there. And one day I'm sitting on a bench with my husband and our baby sleeping in the stroller. And I'm telling him about how this bag that I had just purchased that was hanging off the stroller. It was such a great bag. You know, it was like, oh, you know, it does this and it does this. But actually, you know what? The thing that I don't like about it is that it has Velcro and it's really loud. And like, and I'm describing, and then suddenly I'm like, you know, if I was going to design my own diaper bag, I would make it do this and this. And then it was like this light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, I'm going to design a diaper bag, right? And my husband was like, what? And I was like, I'm going to design a diaper bag. And it was this, like, it felt very much like this window opened up. And even though I had no idea where this idea came from, it felt, you know, one of those times where if you think about it for too long and you convince yourself like that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's this, you know, like that the window would close and it'd be like, okay, well, forget
You have
it.
to take the nudge.
Exactly. So it was like this full body, yes, like I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do this. And that was really the initial idea for my business. And even at that time, I knew in some way that saying yes was connected to me not listening to that voice that said, you can't do this. You are never going to be successful at this. It was just like taking action against that voice. And so the business itself really was initially very much just a challenge to myself to not allow that voice to take charge and to just be like, let's just take it the next step. And let's take the next step and then the next step. And when I get to that place of there's no more steps, I did everything that I could. The business didn't work because I expected it wasn't going to work. Then I could say, good for you. You did everything. You didn't give up. And that was really the plan. And what ended up happening instead was that...
A very different plan.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this was a very slow progression, right? I had 2 kids very close together. When I had the idea for the business, I was actually already pregnant with my second. And I didn't even know it, right?
Oh, wow.
So 2 kids, 16 months apart. And this idea was actually what kept me allowed me to have my own sense of like identity and purpose from being a mother, because being a mother for me was very difficult. I found it very challenging. And so it was kind of like my dream, you know, that I could hang on to. Over the course of a number of years, it just inched along, but it was really not going many places. Like it took me 4 years to get my first product to market. And often I'd be like, wow, I can't believe I'm still doing this. Helping, you know? And even though it felt like a house of cards that could fall at any moment, I realized like I had really been able to do many things that I never thought I could do. And it was like, oh, well, I did this and I did this, but there was always that thing ahead that was like, but I could never do that thing. And then I would do that thing. And after a number of years, I realized you're doing something, like you're doing something. I'm also not that person who started this. I'm actually different. I'm like much more empowered. I had learned how to become like a boss, which I never had seen myself as that. I had to figure things out. And even though that feeling of not good enough was still there, I was able to see like, you know what, maybe that feeling never goes away. And it's not about that feeling. It's just about doing it anyways.
Yeah. Very insightful.
I think that's like the thing. It's like we all have those moments of feeling inadequate or imposter syndrome, all of that. But what sets us apart from those who do and those who don't is just doing it anyway. And like dimming that voice or turning down the volume on that voice. Yeah. And also reminding ourselves of all that we have done already.
Right.
And looking back instead of always looking ahead. So looking back with gratitude and admiration of how far you've come.
Yes. Yes. And so I became very curious about that story, right? Because I have always been interested in personal development, my own personal development, as well as, you know, what makes people who they are, right?
Yeah.
That's always been a curiosity for me. And I started to have this feeling like, I wish I could share what was underneath the story of the brand. And my mind was already kind of trying to figure out, like, how do I share this? Because people were starting to come up to me and say things like, wow, you are so successful. I see your bags everywhere on the playgrounds, blah, blah, blah. And they had this idea that wasn't true, right? I must be just killing it and making so much money and whatever, right? And part of me was like, oh my God, if you only knew how hard this was and like how close
how far it's come.
How close to disaster we are at all times. Yeah.
Yeah, right? And so basically what happened was around that time also, I had taken up meditation. And meditation, I was so stressed out about just the business and the money. And the business had actually become the main source of income for my family. Like my husband had joined the business and it was just this tremendous amount of pressure. And I remember just feeling like this is too much. And I felt really, really unhappy. I'd always been interested in meditation. I'd always been, the 12-step program is a very spiritual program. And so I took up meditation as if it was the most important thing. And what happened was after about a year of being consistently and it was a specific teacher that I was following and stuff, I started to get this sense of like, I want to share about what's happening here. And then we got knocked off by a big brand. We got knocked off by the brand Kate Spade. And they took one of our lunch bags and they put, their own print on it. But I knew that they had used ours as the inspiration shape and material. And what it caused me to do was to really go like, why would anybody choose my bag over Kate Spade's bag? Like truly, why would a consumer who didn't know anything about me go on our website and go, this is the bag that I want, not this one? Wow. Aside from the aesthetic value, right? Like I like their print better. And I realized that there was very, very little on the website that said anything about anything personal. And at the same time, I was starting to feel very much like I had so much to share. And so I decided that I needed to create some kind of emotional resonance because that's what people respond to. And I knew that I needed to start with the story of my recovery from drug addiction because it is the story that really takes off everything. It takes off all masks, right? Yes. And it was a very scary decision to make, and I wasn't sure. But basically what happened was I was part of an entrepreneur's mastermind group that we'd been meeting for a number of years. And there were 6 of us, only one person in that group knew my story. So 4 people didn't know. And so one night I showed up and I basically blew them away. And I was like, I have a story to tell you guys about it. And I like shared down. I got something to share. Yeah. And, of course, people were just like, holy shit, like you, right? Next day, I get an email from one of the women in the group who is now one of my closest friends. And she's asked me if we could go for lunch. And the thing I knew about her, which was that, she was in her early 40s. She had just had her first baby. But it was her second marriage because her first marriage, her husband had passed away. And she had made reference to, when he was ill. So I assumed that he died of some illness, but she never shared anything beyond that. And we went out for lunch, and over lunch, she opened up to me and she told me the most gut-wrenching story of what happened with her husband over the course of 8 years and how he passed away. And there were elements of addiction involved. And so she had never told anyone that because there was so much, I think, privacy and she didn't feel safe to share it. But because I'd shared my story, I think she just felt like I can tell her. And when she did that, I was so touched, right? I was like, wow, I can't believe she felt like I'm the one that she told this to because I shared my story. And that actually is what happened when I decided, finally, I wrote out the story and, we published it on the website. We shared it on social. We shared it on email all on the same day. And we got this outpouring of response from people that just was so supportive. But beyond that, what was so meaningful was that when I shared it on my Instagram, all the people that I know follow me on Instagram. And people that I'd known for years were sharing in the comments things that I never knew about them. One friend of mine shared about her incest survivor experience publicly.
Oh my gosh.
Another one shared about, marriage and it was just, everyone was just taking off their masks, right? And that's when I tapped into something that was so much more meaningful for what I was doing than selling products, right?
Wow.
And not to say that it was not meaningful to sell products, but it was like, it was so hard. It wasn't like I was paying myself a ton of money. And it was just such a struggle. And often I'd be like, why am I doing this? Right. And then suddenly it was like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I was given that gift.
Katherine, and I remember you and I were talking, and we sort of bonded over sharing our stories of headship in the past. And I think your product business was a stepping stone to enable you the platform to be able to share.
Yeah.
And because you had that platform, you are now able to open the door for so many others to feel safe in their own sharing, because we all have a story, and some are more challenging than others, and some are bigger than others, of course, but to each one, those stories are epic.
Yes.
And I think normalizing the sharing and the openness and just the acceptance that this is my story, I think it's really powerful. And if the women who are listening are feeling and building or dreaming of something more, what words of encouragement or wisdom would you offer to someone who feels like they're at the beginning of their own transformation and that mountain just feels so high?
Right.
What would you say to them?
I would say just focus on the next thing.
Yeah. I agree with you on that.
My
Absolutely.
husband said that all the
That's
time.
a pro. That's a pro statement, right? It's not worry about the strategy or all the nebulous things that can go wrong. Just focus on the next step, man.
Well,
I love it.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, your story is so powerful, and I feel like we could talk forever, and I hope we can talk more.
Yeah.
But I just want to ask you one more question before we end, because we are over time and are on expected time. But you talked a lot about path to power.
Yeah.
What does that personally mean to you, and how can we begin to access it in our lives every day?
Well, that statement, that tagline came actually to me during a meditation, because I was grappling with how do I weave kind of the bigger message with products, right? And everything that I've done in my life, right? Including the story of the business, has been in small, consistent steps. On a personal level, also, I have a very dedicated and consistent personal practice that is really and truly about healing and embodiment. So, aside from meditation, I have really prioritized every day to reconnect with who I am. Who I am is actually that experience that I had initially, right? Which is accessible to all of us, truly, but it does take dedication and this desire to know ourselves, right? And to know that we are, at the core of us, we are this incredible peace and this incredible love. And so when I want to get across how do our products stand for this deeper message, something very simple is our products. One of our main products is lunch packing, right? Is our lunch bags.
They're amazing, by the way. I use
kids love it.
to get to them.
And, taking the time to do something consistently, even something as simple as packing your lunch every day, and like doing it mindfully and actually seeing it as an act of self-care, an act of self-love.
Yes.
As you do that consistently, what you're doing is you're developing a habit that over time can be very transformative and can lead to the next thing that you can add on, you can stack on top of that. And that's how I have built my life, is just like small consistent steps and just adding a little bit more and adding a little bit more. And before you know it, you look back and you're like, wow, I am so different than I was. And so that's really what Packet Recover is about.
I love that. It's like making a bed every day. Like people say, what's the point?
Right.
But how good does it feel every night when you get into a tiny bed in the bed? How good does it feel to walk into a room that's tiny and organized?
Yeah.
So the same thing, same concept as the lunch.
Exactly.
And skincare and other things, the little habits that we do to nourish ourselves. And I love this. So Katherine, I know people are going to want to connect with you after this conversation. How can they connect with you?
My personal brand on Instagram, the So Young brand, which is So Young Inc. But my personal one where I kind of go deeper is Katherine.soyoung.
Okay.
So yeah, that's probably the best.
Okay, perfect. We'll have all of this in the show notes so you can access Katherine. And also please DM me if you have any questions. I'm happy to connect with you. Katherine's story is a testament to the power of reinvention. That even at darkest moments, we carry the potential to rebuild, to rise, and to serve others through the wisdom that we've earned. So Young is more than a brand. It's a movement that reminds us that success is not just what we build, but who we become along the way. Katherine's courage to unmask, to speak her truth, and to create from her heart has become a light for me and others finding their way. If you're listening today and holding a quiet dream or navigating a personal challenge, let this episode remind you you have power. You're not alone, and it is never too late to begin again. Katherine, thank you so much for sharing your story so vulnerably, so openly, and for making the time to be with us today. It meant so much.
No, thank you. I'm so happy to do it.
That was very powerful. I really enjoyed that story. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Love Saranghae with us, Peter and Andrea. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. Your ratings and reviews help more people like you find our show. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and share this podcast with someone you think would love it. Until next time, love yourself, love one another, and love the world.